see in a mirror dimly, a glass darkly, then face to face. Now my knowledge is imperfect, then I shall know fully as I am fully known. And thus there abides faith, hope, and love, these three. But the highest of these is love. Run after love. These are verses from Paul's great hymn to love. We find it in his first letter to the church at Corinth, chapter 13. The long and short of his message, of that great hymn, is that we are imperfect beings and we have an imperfect view. God is a perfect being with a perfect view. We have only a glimpse of God. None of us lays claim to a perfect view or a perfect understanding. Each of us looks through a glass so that all of our thoughts and all of our views are filtered. That glass is dark and dim. All of our understanding is filtered, distorted, unclear. To say that we understand anything about life, about the world, about ourselves, others, or God, is to admit that we only have a partial, fuzzy at best view from wherever we sit or stand. And knowing that we have an imperfect view and that we live with that imperfect understanding, that knowledge itself should dictate, or at the very least, temper the way we live our lives. There are two lists in this great hymn of love that Paul presents us with. A perfect list, which refers to God and his love, and an imperfect list, which refers to us and the way we should live our lives. It is a list of temporary things on one side and eternal things on the other side. For any of the temporary and imperfect things on this one side to be of any use to us, they all need love. Without love, they are nothing, and we gain nothing by using them. That makes love indispensable. Love is everything, and everything or anything else is a muggy blur. And that includes gifts, spiritual, natural, learned, born with. It includes all our knowledge, all our endeavors, all our pursuits, all our goals, all of our possessions. You could be the best at everything you do, but without love, it is all critically flawed. Ancient Corinth was famed for its brass and bronze and craftsmanship in precious metals like silver and gold. It was destroyed by the Romans in 146 BCE. But by 44 BCE, the city had all but been restored to its former glory, and the craftsmen of that once bustling metal hub resumed their trade. And it was in that city that Paul himself traded. He experienced Corinth firsthand. He was, as was his friends, tent makers. They sold their tents in these markets and would have witnessed for themselves the sights and sounds of the metal workers and the brass makers. Now, before its much more recent destruction, during the conflicts of Syria, the city of Aleppo was similarly famed for its old-fashioned brass working. The world-famous markets of Aleppo were the last known modern example of that very ancient trade. It's gone now, sadly. If we'd have had a chance to go to Aleppo, and you may have been there, you would have witnessed for yourself the old-fashioned metalworking and brass making that went on. Now, I read several different accounts. I've never been, but I read several different accounts of those who had visited these markets. Watched some videos, actually, of the metalworkers there. And they all share one thing in common. The noise is utterly deafening. It's like a giant wind-up toy monkey banging and clattering relentlessly its cymbals. You might never have been to those markets in Aleppo or in Corinth with Paul. But you might have been in an environment where it was so noisy you could hardly think. That's what it's like to speak without love, to listen without love, to live without love. It is to speak and to think and to live in a deafening and all-consuming, relentless noise. Even if I learn to speak fluent human or fluent angel, without love, I'm just a high-pitched racket. The world is filled with noisy, ear-splitting messages. Not always audible, but they ring in our ears, messages without love. It makes love all the more indispensable. What love does, the God kind of love that Paul speaks about in this great hymn, we might put a Greek word to it, agape, agapeo. What that love does is it filters all of this noise, this ear-splitting noise. It turns down the static on the radio. It cleans up the signal. It replaces the banging gongs with discernible melodies, with harmonies that make much more sense than those unfiltered noisings. In his first letter, John writes that we love because he first loved us. And if anyone says that I love God and hates his brother, he is a liar. For he who does not love his brother, whom he has seen, cannot love God, whom he has not seen. And this commandment we have from him: whoever loves God must also love his brother. This is the great litmus test for the believer. This is the great revealer of hypocrisy, distinguishing between those filtered and unfiltered messages. Because we cannot say that we love God and then speak and listen and live as if we hate and despise anyone. Now, we can only love because of God's indwelling Holy Spirit. God's love at work on the inside of us, imperfect beings, through us, not just in us, but through us, so that it is love towards others. We are imperfect beings with an imperfect view. And that love working on the inside of us and through us is the only possible hope that we have of mirroring anything of God's perfect love. Love is patient. Kind is love. Not jealous, not boastful, not arrogant, not rude, not seeking what is for itself, not quick to anger, not keeping records of wrongs, not rejoicing in unrighteousness, but rejoicing in community when truth prevails, covers all, believes all, hopes all, patiently endures all. 15 definitions of agape love that Paul gives in his great hymn. Some positive, some negative. Loving is so fundamental to our existence that it is synonymous with the way we live. What we do, the positive, what we don't do, the negative. How should we, imperfect beings, live in an imperfect world with our imperfect view? As imperfect beings living in an imperfect world, we should love with our imperfect view and understanding. For the imperfect Christian, that's you, that's me, live equals love. The only difference, we've taken out the I. It is a matter of changing our focus. We are imperfect beings with an imperfect view living in an imperfect world, but God is a perfect being with a perfect view. We have only a glimpse, a fuzzy partial view, but this is how we should live, or rather love with our imperfect view. Changing the I, changing our focus. The truth is, friends, we live in a society, in a culture and in a world that is obsessed with self. For some, taking selfies is a permanent preoccupation, a way of recording their life, of negotiating their way, of navigating their way through this complex, fuzzy picture we call life. I don't know what your thoughts are like on things like selfies, but I think that at least in part, it is a symptom of much of what ails us. Bit of an obsession. What matters, though, is that self is perhaps one of the most distorting filters that we have when we look at the world. But it is the only filter that we have without God's love working on the inside of us. Very few of us have a sober, objective, healthy view of self. In fact, some might argue that such a view is impossible since we are subjective beings. We only have our own mind, our own thoughts, our own eyes with which to view and to see the world. We've only got our ears to hear. We've only got our mouth to speak. Whether overly inflated or self-deprecating, we rarely, however, see ourselves as others might see us. And that might seem like common sense. How can we possibly know what it's like to be someone else and to look at ourselves through that different lens? So we all struggle. But we struggle not just to see ourselves as others see us within this very limited, constrained view that we have. We certainly struggle to understand how God sees us in His light, in the light of agape. To love self as Jesus encouraged and commanded us to do, as part of the way that we live and negotiate in the world, is not an obsession with self, however. Self-confidence is not the great virtue of modern society that we are told it is. Should you be confident? Should you be assured? Well, of course, to say that we should implies a moral judgment. The implication is that those who are not confident or self-assured are somehow doing something wrong, living immorally, or at best, they're living less than their potential. You might say, well, I think confidence is really important because, and you'll have a list. You'll have some things that you think are important and that confidence and assurance in the world remedies. You might have a list of things related to your ideas of what it means to be a success, to have success in life or success in job. These are the kind of phrases that we use to understand the kind of life that we think is important. If you want to get anywhere in life, so if you want to use a metaphor of a journey in life, if you want to get to where you're going, if you want to reach that goal, again, you'll have a mental list or an idea of the things that will make that work. And confidence and assurance will certainly probably make that list. The same is true of our ideas of well-being and health, mental or physical. The same is true of our relationships. You shouldn't let people trample all over you. You'll not find love if you're not sure of yourself. You might simply have a list related to survival, forget success, just making it through, coping with whatever life seems to throw at you, which sometimes feels like just one big, long storm. It's a dog-eat-dog-out world out there, and we need confidence. You need to put your head up. Don't give in. Get up. All of these things are important and they're fine to a degree. But I think they miss the point. We are so conditioned to look out for self that we've got no good idea of what the alternative might look like. Society, school, government, authors, celebrities, media, friends, family, charities, churches, everyone has a message of self in some fashion or another at its center, at its core. Now, I'm not in any way saying that any of that is misguided or wrong, but I do think we should question its true value and ask ourselves if it's possible that we might be missing the point. What really matters? Is the way that we live a reflection of this agape love and Paul's great hymn? Let's read it one more time. For now, we see in a mirror dimly, a glass darkly, but then face to face. Now my knowledge is imperfect, but then I shall know fully, as I am fully known. Love is patient. Kind is love. Not jealous, not boastful, not arrogant, not rude, not seeking what is for itself, not quick to anger, not keeping records of wrongs, not rejoicing in unrighteousness, but rejoicing in community when truth prevails, covers all, believes all, hopes all, patiently endures all. And thus there abides faith, hope, and love. These three, but the greatest of these is love. Run after love.